Imagine you're walking down the street in downtown Youngstown, Ohio, and suddenly the building in front of you explodes. Debris flies across the road. The ground floor collapses. One man inside doesn't make it out. And when investigators finally pieced together what happened, the answer was worse than anyone expected. The city had hired a crew to do a $140,133 routine fix. The crew cut a pipe they were told was dead, and 6 minutes later, a 100-year-old landmark was gone. Not because of neglect, not because of age, because a single database entry from 2015 said the gas line was abandoned. It wasn't. And right now, 5,951 more records across Ohio say the same thing. If you're new here, this channel covers the engineering failures and cover-ups behind America's most troubled projects. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. There are 114 painted parking spaces where the Realty Tower used to be. The DoubleTree Hilton stands directly across East Federal Street, busy with guests. International Towers still holds its 170-something residents. Both buildings survived. The building between them is gone. The contract that triggered the disaster cost $140,133. The explosion caused $42 million in property damage. The building had been on the National Register of Historic Places since 1980. A previous owner had spent $9 million restoring it. A routine sidewalk improvement project designed to make the downtown better, erased all of it in a single afternoon. To understand how that is possible, you have to understand one thing first. Nobody in the basement that day knew they were cutting a live pipe. The Realty Building was built in 1924 for the Realty Guarantee and Trust Company, the most powerful real estate institution in Youngstown at the peak of the city's industrial era. The architect was Morris Scheibel, one of the most respected designers in the region, and he built something that announced itself. Beaux-Arts detail work in terracotta, a marble lobby with hand-painted plaster crown moldings and a granite baseboard, 12 floors of brick piers designed to emphasize the vertical rise. The building cost $500,000 to construct, and it stood at the corner of Central Square like a declaration that Youngstown intended to matter. For decades it did. The Realty Guarantee and Trust Company operated from that address while the steel mills ran at capacity and the city grew. When the mills began to close in the 1970s and 1980s, Youngstown entered one of the most severe industrial collapses in American urban history. Population fell, storefronts emptied, buildings on Central Square went dark one by one. The Realty Tower kept standing, long enough to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, long enough to become a monument to what the city had once been. Around 2009, a developer named Dominic Marchionda and his company invested roughly $9 million to bring the building back to life. The restoration created 23 apartments on the upper floors, put a coffee shop and eventually a Chase Bank on the ground level, and made the Realty Tower part of a broader effort to revitalize downtown Youngstown. The effort worked, at least for a while. Apartments filled. The building became a living piece of the city's revival story. An Ohio historical marker went up directly in front of the entrance, documenting 100 years of architectural significance. In 2018, the building sold to YO Properties, 47 LLC for $2 million. Brian Angelilli, who is also a founder of Greenheart Companies LLC, a Boardman-based general contractor, was connected to the new ownership. Underneath all of this, the building's basement held something nobody was thinking carefully about: a tangle of utility lines, some of them decades old, whose status as active or inactive existed almost entirely on paper. In 2008, Dominion Energy, which provided natural gas to businesses and residents inside the Realty Tower, removed the gas meter from a 1-inch service line in the basement area. When a meter is removed, standard procedure requires a worker to locate and close the curb stop valve, effectively sealing the line from the main supply. A note in the record indicated that the task should be completed. According to NTSB investigators, there is no evidence it ever was. The valve remained open. The line remained connected to the pressurized main, carrying natural gas at roughly 38 pounds per square inch. In September 2015, A record appeared in Dominion Energy's customer care system, stating that the 1-inch service line had been manually cut and abandoned. The NTSB investigation later found that record was inaccurate. Normally, that kind of task would be assigned to a construction and maintenance crew, who would complete the physical work and log it electronically. This entry, however, was typed in manually by a customer relations specialist. There is no field verification, no completion report, no physical evidence the pipe was ever touched. The system said the line was dead. The line was not dead. Drop a comment. Did you know gas lines could be sitting live under a city with nobody aware of it? That data entry sat in a database for 9 years, and everyone who later needed to know the status of the pipe looked at that database and saw the same answer: abandoned, disconnected, safe to treat as scrap. By early 2024, the City of Youngstown was moving forward with a downtown improvement initiative called the Smart 2 project, which included relocating utility lines running beneath the sidewalk in front of the Realty Tower. On April 19, the city's Board of Control awarded a $140,133 no-bid contract to Greenheart Companies to handle the utility relocation work. The decision to skip competitive bidding was explained by the fact that Greenheart was connected to the building's ownership. It was simpler, officials said, to have the building's own operator do the work. Before the contract was signed, before a single tool was brought to the site, nobody contacted Enbridge Gas Ohio, which had acquired the gas distribution network when it purchased Dominion Energy Ohio's assets in March 2024. The Enbridge Director of Gas Operations later told NTSB investigators that the company received no communication from the City of Youngstown, the contractor, or the building owner before any work began. The 4-person scrap removal crew arrived in the basement vault on May 28, 2024. They were there to remove old pipes and cables, the kind of cleanup that happens on urban construction sites across the country every day. They had the drawings. They had the records. The records showed which lines were live and which were not. The 1-inch gas service line was marked abandoned. One crew member picked up a reciprocating saw and began to cut. At 2:39 p.m., halfway through the cut, he heard a loud whistle. He felt gas blowing into his face from the pipe. The crew dropped their tools, exited the basement, pulled the fire alarm on the first floor, and called 911. They warned bank employees. They tried to clear the building. Youngstown Fire Department units received reports of a gas odor and were already responding when, at 2:44 p.m., the natural gas ignited. 6 minutes from the cut to the explosion, the blast destroyed most of the first floor, sending the facade across East Federal Street. It crumpled the ground-level structure and caused severe damage through the floors above. Akil Drake, 27, a Chase Bank employee, did not survive. 9 others were hospitalized. The 23 families living in the apartments above the bank were evacuated and never permitted to return. One resident later described learning that his mother's ashes and childhood photographs were still inside, that retrieval was impossible, and that he would not get them back. What emerged from the NTSB investigation was something worse than a single act of negligence. Every party present, the gas company, the city, the contractor, the building owner, had relied on the same official record. The record was wrong, and the wrongness was not limited to one building. After the explosion, the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio required Enbridge to excavate 10 service lines in the area that had been documented as abandoned in roughly the same time frame as the Realty Tower line. 2 of those 10 lines were still pressurized, still carrying gas, still alive. Then Enbridge reported that it was reviewing 5,951 additional pipelines across Ohio, lines documented as abandoned, but carrying inconsistent or unconfirmed data. NTSB documents noted that some of those lines may have been switched to abandoned status through what investigators described as an IT push to clean up some data, a software migration that appears to have mass-labeled live lines as inactive. The Realty Tower didn't explode because one reckless person cut a pipe without checking. It exploded because a faulty record, entered by a customer relations specialist instead of a field crew, was trusted by every institution that later needed to rely on it. And because that same kind of faulty record may exist in thousands of other locations. A 210-foot collapse zone was declared around the building after the explosion, and on June 10, city officials ordered the evacuation of International Towers and the DoubleTree Hilton Hotel, which sits directly across the street. About 173 residents were displaced from International Towers. The hotel remained closed for nearly 3 months. Downtown businesses that had already been struggling through pandemic closures and ongoing construction disruption lost more customers, more months, more momentum. The Mahoning Valley Historical Society immediately called for stabilization and preservation. The building's owners initially explored whether the structure could be saved. Engineers hired to assess the damage concluded that it posed an imminent collapse risk. An emergency demolition order was issued. The mayor gave the owners until July 5 to begin. Demolition started July 12, 2024, using a 90-ton crane and a 5,000-pound wrecking ball. Getting the building down proved harder than expected. International Towers stands close enough to the Realty site that crews couldn't work at speed. Steel had to be cut by hand with torches. The Ohio Environmental Protection Agency required constant wet down of the demolition dust because of asbestos, which slowed everything further. The plan called for reaching the 4th floor by August 2. That deadline slipped to August 19. The full demolition wasn't completed until September 25, 12 weeks after it began, twice as long as originally projected. The building that took years to restore and decades to preserve took 3 months to carefully take apart. When the last material was removed, the city paid $700,000 to repair Market Street and East Federal Street, including roads, sidewalks, utilities, landscaping, and curb ramps damaged in the aftermath. The city also paid $259,700 for emergency work performed by a separate demolition contractor in the immediate hours after the explosion. The total public cost of simply cleaning up after the event kept rising through the end of 2024. The wrongful death settlement for Akil Drake's family was reached in the summer of 2024. The total was $6.1 million. Enbridge and its subsidiaries paying $2.9 million. YO Properties and Greenheart paying $3 million. And an architectural firm and engineering company each contributing $100,000. In August 2025, the NTSB released its final report. The official probable cause was a cut by a scrap removal crew into an active Enbridge service line that had been incorrectly documented as abandoned by Dominion Energy years earlier, with Chase Bank's emergency evacuation procedures listed as a contributing factor for not requiring employees to immediately exit upon a gas alert. On May 28, 2026, exactly 2 years after the explosion, and precisely at the statute of limitations deadline, the City of Youngstown filed its own multi-count lawsuit against Enbridge, Dominion Energy, and other defendants, seeking recovery for public infrastructure damage and emergency response costs. The litigation is ongoing. The site is a parking lot. The owners said they remain committed to developing it. As of mid-2026, no confirmed plan exists. The DoubleTree is open. International Towers is occupied. East Federal Street has been repaved. And where the Realty Tower stood for exactly 1 century, through the steel boom and the steel collapse, through the roof being torn off in a 1955 storm, through a decade of vacancy and a $9 million restoration and 23 families building lives on its upper floors, there are painted lines on asphalt and 114 parking spaces. Ohio passed a new regulation requiring inactive gas lines to be physically severed within 3 years of going inactive. The rule took effect in August 2025. Enbridge is still working through the review of those 5,951 pipelines. The final report uses a single word to describe what went wrong: not sealed, not disconnected, documented. The line was documented as abandoned. The documentation was wrong. A building that survived everything Youngstown could throw at it for 100 years was destroyed because a database said it was safe, and nobody physically checked. Somewhere in Ohio right now, 5,951 records say the same thing. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe. There are more where this came from, and they don't get simpler.